Your menu bar is hidden, probably. Whatever. Let's just lock in. Oh, show the menus? Oh! Boom. There we go. Insert. You said drawing?
Yeah, there's drawing, and then you should be able to then you should be able to then draw what you want to actually draw, and it'll put it into the document.
Oh, wait 1 second.
That's one way to do it.
We're gonna have to pull something else up then. This will be worth it, everybody. Math class with Dean. Can we get some W math classes?
You should be lucky I'm being patient with you on this.
In the chat. Can we get some W math class in the chat? Okay, perfect. All right. We have everything I need. All of my tools are ready. Okay. So here's the question that I'm asking the guests. Why is it false that if the GDP is higher and spending is lower, then the spending as a percentage of the GDP is lower? Now, the reason why I'm asking this question to the guests is because it literally cannot be false that if the GDP is higher and spending is lower, then the spending as a percentage of the GDP is lower. Let's do an example. Let's take a look at the notepad. Let's imagine that the GDP is 100 for reasons of simplicity, and that the spending is 10 for reasons of simplicity. We're all tracking? Phenomenal. And this is going to be Trump. And then under Biden, the GDP, we'll actually make this 20. Then under Biden, the GDP is 200, and then the spending is only 10. All right. So if we wanted to calculate the spending as a percentage of the GDP, what would we do? Well, we'd ask ourselves, 20 is what percent of 100? Wow. So 20 is 20% of 100. So the spending as a percentage of the GDP would be 20%. Fantastic. And then what about under Biden? So the spending went up from the GDP went up from 100 to 200, and the spending went down from 20 to 10. So now let's determine what the percentage is of 10 out of 200. All right. Let's be simple. If 10 is 10% of 100, and 200 is 100 times 2, then it must be 10% divided by 2. So it must be 5%. Right?
Mm-hmm. Yep, it's 5.
So what we see is that when the GDP goes up and spending goes down, you are then, attempting to determine what percentage a smaller number would represent of a larger number. And if this number continues to get smaller and smaller and smaller, and this number continues to get larger and larger and larger, this bottom number, the spending, will be a progressively smaller percent of the larger number. So back to the question, why is it false that if the GDP is higher and spending is lower, then the spending as a percentage of the GDP is lower? Sir, do you now understand that that can't be false? Because to say that that's false would be to say that if the GDP got larger and larger and larger, and spending got smaller and smaller and smaller, that some fucking how the smaller spending could be a larger percentage of the growing number.
But here's what you're getting wrong. When you talk about percentages of GDP to spending, I'm just talking about the ratio of how much of our GDP is from government spending.
That's what this number represents. This is the ratio. Well, it's actually not a ratio. It's a percentage.
I let you talk for 10 minutes straight and do a math thing. You're going to interrupt me? Come on, bro.
Go ahead.
Okay. If the private sector increases greatly, and then government spending increases with it, but not at the same rate as before of its GDP, then yes, government spending can be a smaller percentage with higher GDP growth. Is Trump spending significantly less than Joe Biden? No, he's not. But with the growth of the private sector compared to the rate of the government's growth, it's at a much smaller rate. So that's how Trump is able to have GDP growth, but not have government spending be the same amount percentage.
So I don't think that much of that made sense. Because the GDP, the gross domestic product, is not a variable of the government's growth. That's a variable of the overall transaction in the market. Okay? And spending, that's a variable that represents how much the government is spending. So are you saying that Biden spent more than Trump? Or are you saying that the GDP was lower under Biden than it was under Trump?
I'm saying that Trump spends less than Biden when it comes to percentage of
I know,
government spending.
but there's only two ways for that to be true. The lesson I gave you, okay, was to show you that there's only two possible ways that that claim could be true. The only way that Trump's percentage of spending as a part of the GDP right here could be lower than the percentage of spending as a part of the GDP under Biden was if either Donald Trump had a higher GDP, this number right here, and spent the same or relatively the same, or Donald Trump had a lower GDP, which is what the fact of the matter is. The GDP on average was higher under Biden because it progressively grows the more and more time passes, but had lower spending.
But Trump's GDP has grown too, like he's not one quarter has had negative growth.
Okay, well, that's not true. We did have negative growth in the GDP of Q1 in 2025, so you're incorrect. But holistically, the GDP has gone up, and I agree. So are you arguing here that Trump in his first term had a higher average GDP than Biden in his first term? Or are you arguing that Trump in his first term had lower spending than Biden in his first term? It has to be true,
I'm arguing
that Trump either had higher GDP or lower spending in order to have a lower spending as a percentage of the GDP. Do you accept that in order for it to be true, for Donald Trump to have a lower spending as a percentage of the GDP, Donald Trump either had to have higher GDP or lower spending?
He had higher GDP. Trump's first term had incredible GDP growth, and his second term has also had really great GDP growth.
So we're not looking at GDP growth. 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 We're looking at the average GDP over the 4-year administration, because that is the variable that we would use to determine the average spending as a percentage of the GDP over the 4-year administration. The year by year, just listen to me. Just listen to me here, man. The year by year growth rate in the GDP doesn't matter for this equation. I thought I showed this to you on the notepad. Dude, look at the notepad. Looking at the notepad here, the two variables, okay, that we use to determine the percentage of spending as GDP growth would be GDP average and spending over 4 years. Do you agree that the two variables to determine the percentage of spending as a GDP would be the GDP average and the spending over 4 years? Do you agree?
This is a rate to my claim, though.
No. Do you agree? Do you agree that the two variables used to determine the percentage of spending of the GDP would be the average GDP over the 4-year term and how much they spent over the 4-year term? Do you agree that those are the two variables to determine the percentage of spending as a part of the GDP?
Yeah, like your equation is not made up.
Okay, so you're saying that my equation to determine the percentage of spending as a part of the GDP is wrong?
No, I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm saying it's not made up.
Okay, so you agree. So you do agree that the two variables would be spending over 4 years and GDP. Okay, so you agree with my variable. Okay, so which one was it? Are you saying that either Trump had a higher average GDP over his 4 years or Trump had lower spending over his 4 years? Which one? Because now we know that one of those two things has to be true.
First one's true. But here's the thing.
Okay. So you're saying the first one's true. No. We're not done yet. No, we're not done yet because you're wrong.
I'm done with it.
Okay, so you're saying that Donald Trump had a higher average GDP over his 4-year term than Biden did during his 4-year term. No, that's not true.
Dude, he had real growth GDP from the private sector. Trump's first term had GDP growth above 3% for multiple quarters.
Oh wait, I thought that we just agreed.
Obama said that wasn't possible anymore.
I thought that we literally just agreed that GDP growth is not a relevant factor or variable in the equation to determine the percentage of spending as GDP. Okay, take a look at this. Take a look at this. I'll prove you wrong. So this guest's claim is that the GDP was higher on average under Trump in his first term than Biden in his first term. I'll show you guys a resource to prove that wrong. So here is the GDP on the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis's website. This right here is Donald Trump's first 4 years. That's Donald Trump's first 4 years. This right here is Biden's 4 years. Trump. This is Trump. This is Biden. Trump. Biden. Trump. Biden. So we could see that the GDP was lower every single year under Donald Trump's first administration than it was every single year under Biden's first administration. And if you know how averages work, if every number in the data set that we are attempting to average is lower in data set number 1, Trump's 4 years, than data set number 2, Biden's 4 years, then the average GDP would be higher under Biden than Trump. So when you said that the average GDP under Trump in his first term was higher than Biden in his 4 years, you were wrong. Now that we know it's not true that the average GDP was higher under Trump than it was under Biden, that leaves you with one option for your claim that the spending as a percentage of the GDP was higher under Biden in his 4 years to be true. That one option would be is that spending was higher under Biden. And I have a source to show you it wasn't. The CRBF is the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. The CRBF tells us that under Trump in his first term spent $8.6 trillion, and Biden under his first 4 years spent $4.6 trillion. Wow. So because under Biden, the average GDP was higher and the debt that he signed into law was lower, per the math class I gave you earlier, it's mathematically impossible for Biden's spending as a percentage of the GDP to be higher than Trump. You could speak now. This is fun. Teaching Trump supporters third grade math. Muted.
Can you do your job right? Listen, dude. Everything you just said was wrong. Joe Biden flooded the dollar with he printed $30 trillion. Joe Biden's growth was artificial from the public sector. He flooded the country with immigrants and he gave them aid to artificially boost spending. Why did so many people say under Joe Biden's presidency when they were polled and asked if he felt unhappy about
listen,
it?
the only two variables that matter here are average GDP and new debt signed into law.
Americans said they were not happy about it.
So now have I proven to you that the average GDP under Biden was higher than the average GDP under Trump? Have I proven that to you?
It's fake growth. It's fake growth.
Okay, so you're saying that the spending as a percentage of the GDP was lower under Biden, but only because of fake growth?
Yes.
Okay, so you concede your claim that the spending as a percentage of the GDP was higher under Biden.
Because it's fake. I'm not agreeing with you at all.
Thank you
dumbass.
for conceding.
Hey, Blondie. Hey,
Thank
Blondie.
you for
Blondie,
conceding.
No one liked Joe Biden's
Thank
economy.
you for conceding, buddy. Thank you for the concession, asshole. Thank you for conceding, old man. Thank you for conceding, idiot. Thank you for conceding, moron. Thank you for conceding, MAGA crash out. Thank you for conceding. I appreciate you for conceding the point that you made, which was the spending as a percentage of the GDP was higher under Biden than it was under Trump. And I double appreciate you for coming up with some half-assed, MAGA moronic quasi-justification for why that's the case. You're wrong about you when you said that spending as a percentage of the GDP was high, because apparently Biden artificially propped up the GDP growth. Okay, well, if that's true, then it's not true that spending as a percentage of the GDP was higher under him. Thanks for coming to my TED Talk of basic fucking math.